Eliza, you can't avoid him forever, my assistant Mariana whispered, leaning into my office. He's been waiting in reception for over an hour. I continued typing, my fingers striking the keyboard with measured precision, not bothering to look up. I'm the CEO of Athena Technologies. I have meetings scheduled back-to-back until 7 p.m. If he wants to see me, he can make an appointment like everyone else. He says he won't leave until you see him. Mariana shifted uncomfortably. Security asked if they should escort him out. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I finally stopped typing, leaning back in my Italian leather chair. The one I'd bought to replace the mid-range office furniture David had insisted was perfectly adequate during our marriage. My gaze drifted to the wall of windows showcasing the Seattle skyline, rain pelting against the glass in sheets. How fitting. Let him wait, I said, my voice betraying none of the turbulence I felt. When my 2 o'clock cancels, and they will, this weather's grounding all flights. You can pencil him in for 15 minutes. Not a second more. Mariana nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. She'd been with me through everything. The divorce, the company restructuring, the nights I spent sleeping on the office couch because our house, my house, held too many memories. She knew exactly what David Mercer deserved, and 15 minutes of my precious time wasn't it. As predicted, my 2 o'clock called to reschedule just before lunch. I took my time, reviewing quarterly projections, approving the final designs for our new neural interface, and even making a personal call to our biggest investor. Only then did I nod to Mariana, send him in, and stay on the intercom. If I say we should wrap this up, I want you to call with an urgent matter. David entered my office with that familiar, confident stride, though his smile faltered when I didn't stand to greet him. 3 years ago, he'd walked out of our marriage with the same self-assured arrogance, explaining over dinner that he'd found something special with his 26-year-old secretary, Amber. Something I, apparently, with my constant focus on the company, couldn't give him. Now he stood before me in a suit that cost more than what most of my employees made in a month, his hair perfectly styled, looking every bit the successful finance director of Reynolds Technologies, our biggest competitor. Eliza, he said, his voice carrying that warm undertone he used when trying to charm someone. You look amazing. Running your own company agrees with you. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. Not the comfortable one I reserved for long meetings with valued team members. The rigid, slightly too low one I kept for difficult conversations. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe. To our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I have 13 minutes before my next meeting, David. What do you want? He sat, clearly surprised by my directness. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the man I'd married 12 years ago, before success had transformed him into someone I barely recognized. Can't an ex-husband check in? See how you're doing? He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I've been following your company's progress, that neural interface you're developing. It's impressive. 10 members of your R&D team certainly thought. So when they tried to poach our lead engineer last month, I kept my expression neutral, hands folded on my desk. Again, what do you want? David had the decency to look embarrassed. That wasn't my department. If I'd known... 8 minutes now, I interrupted. He straightened, the charm falling away. Fine, I need a job. The statement hung in the air between us. I waited, allowing the silence to stretch uncomfortably. You need a job, I finally repeated, my tone making it clear how absurd I found his request. Isn't Reynolds Technologies doing well? Last I heard, you were being groomed for CFO. David's jaw tightened. Things changed. Things have a habit of doing that, I replied, thinking of how my own life had unraveled 3 years ago when he'd packed his things and moved into Amber's downtown loft. Reynolds is restructuring after the merger. Most of finance is being consolidated to their East Coast offices. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit I once found endearing. I'm being let go at the end of the month. I raised an eyebrow. And Amber? Isn't she in HR there now? Surely she can help her husband find a suitable position. The flash of pain across his face told me everything before he even spoke. Amber and I are divorced 6 months ago. She's actually moving to New York with the new head of operations. I should have felt satisfaction, some sense of karmic justice. But instead, I just felt tired. 3 years ago, this news would have vindicated every tear I'd shed. Now, it was merely information to process. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, surprising even myself with the sincerity in my voice. But I still don't understand what you're doing in my office. I need a job, Liz, he said, using the nickname only he had ever used. And not just any job. I need my old position back. I stared at him, momentarily speechless. When we'd founded Athena together, back when it was just a small tech startup with big dreams, David had been our financial backbone. After our divorce, I'd bought out his share, using every penny I had and loans I'm still paying off. The company had nearly collapsed during the transition, but we'd survived. More than survived, we'd thrived. Your old position? I laughed, the sound sharp even to my own ears. That position doesn't exist anymore, David. We've restructured twice since you left. Then create something new. Director of Financial Strategy, Chief Investment Officer, whatever you want to call it. He leaned forward, desperation creeping into his voice. We both know I'm good at what I do. The work I did here laid the foundation for everything you've built. The work we did, I corrected coldly. And then you walked away. You chose Reynolds over Athena. Over me. I made a mistake, he said quietly. I glanced at my watch, an elegant Patek Philippe I'd bought myself when we secured our Series C funding. You've made several, and now your mistakes have caught up with you. Liz, please. I've got a mortgage. Alimony payments to Amber? That's rich, I cut in, feeling a spark of the anger I'd thought I'd moved past. You left me for her, and now you're paying her alimony? What happened there? David's shoulders slumped. She had a better lawyer. For the first time since he entered my office, I smiled. Sounds like you should have paid more attention when I warned you about her, doesn't it? The intercom buzzed. Ms. Chen, your 3 o'clock is waiting in the conference room, Mariana's voice announced right on cue. I stood, smoothing my charcoal. Armani suit. Your 15 minutes are up, David. Liz, I'm begging you. He remained seated, looking up at me with those blue eyes that once could convince me of anything. Give me a chance. I'll take any position, any salary. I just need to get back on my feet. I walked around my desk, pausing beside him. You should have thought about that before you traded 14 years together for a younger model. It wasn't like that, he protested weakly. It was exactly like that. I moved toward the door. Submit your resume through our HR portal like everyone else. If you're qualified for any openings, someone will be in touch. David stood, his face hardening. So, that's it? After everything we built together, after all the years we spent side by side, you're just going to throw me to the wolves? I turned. At the door, one hand on the handle. No, David, I'm not going to do anything to you. I'm simply going to treat you like any other applicant, with professional courtesy and nothing more. You taught me that distinction when you explained that our marriage and our business were separate entities, remember? His face flushed at having his own words thrown back at him. Goodbye, David. Security will see you out. I walked out, my heels clicking decisively on the hardwood floor, and headed to my non-existent 3 o'clock meeting. I needed a moment alone, away from the curious eyes of my team who undoubtedly recognized the man who had broken their boss's heart 3 years ago. In the empty conference room, I stood at the window, watching Seattle disappear into the mist and rain. My reflection stared back, a woman who had rebuilt herself piece by painful piece after being shattered. My phone buzzed with a text from Mariana. "He's gone. You okay?" I wasn't sure how to answer that. Was I okay? The company was thriving. Our neural interface prototype had surpassed all expectations in preliminary testing. I had a beautiful lake house, a rescued greyhound named Edison, and more money than I'd ever dreamed of when David and I were starting out. But seeing him, vulnerable, desperate, his life in shambles, had awakened something I thought I'd buried alongside our marriage certificate. Not love, certainly, but something unsettlingly close to pity. The conference room door opened, and Mariana entered with a steaming cup of tea. Jasmine, my favorite. "He submitted his resume before leaving," she said, placing the cup in front of me. "Added a personal note saying he's willing to start at entry level if necessary." I sipped the tea, feeling its warmth spread through me. "Delete it." Mariana raised an eyebrow. "You sure? He might actually be useful. Remember how he handled the Miller account crisis?" "I remember everything," I said quietly. "That's the problem." Back in my office, I tried to focus on the technical specifications for our neural interface, but my mind kept drifting back to David. The desperate look in his eyes. The wrinkles that hadn't been there 3 years ago. The slight tremor in his hands when he mentioned being let go. Around 8 p.m., long after most of the staff had gone home, I found myself opening our HR portal, searching for David's application. There it was. Alongside his impressive resume was a cover letter that began, "Dear Ms. Chen, I know I'm the last person who deserves a chance." I closed the browser before I could read further. This wasn't a decision to make tonight. With rain lashing against my windows and memories clouding my judgment. As I gathered my things to leave, my phone rang. Sophie Chen, my mother. "Have you eaten dinner, daughter?" she asked without preamble, her Mandarin accent stronger when she was worried. "I'm heading home now, Mom. I'll grab something on the way. Zhang Wei told me he saw David at your office today. My mother's best friend's son worked in our IT department. Nothing stayed secret." "For long?" I sighed. "He needs a job. Reynolds is letting him go." "That company he left you for?" My mother's disapproval traveled clearly across the phone line. "And the young girl?" "She left him for someone else." The silence from my mother spoke volumes. Finally, she said, "The universe has its own justice. Mom, you remember what your father always said? Be careful who you hurt on your way up, because you might need them when you fall." My chest tightened at the mention of my father, gone 5 years now. He'd loved David like a son, had been heartbroken by his betrayal. I remember. "So what? Will you do?" I stared out at the rainy night, the city lights blurred into watercolor streaks. "I don't know yet." "You know," she said softly. "You're just afraid of the answer." After hanging up, I drove home through the rain-slicked streets, my wipers fighting a losing battle against the downpour. My lake house was dark when I arrived, save for the automatic porch light that welcomed me with its soft glow. Edison greeted me at the door, his tail wagging gently as he pressed his lean body against my legs. I scratched behind his ears, finding comfort in his simple, uncomplicated affection. Later, curled up on my sofa with a glass of Cabernet, Edison's head in my lap, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of seeing David again. The pain had dulled over the years, transforming from a sharp, stabbing agony to a muted ache that only occasionally made itself known. Today, it had roared back to life. I pulled out my laptop and opened his application again, forcing myself to read his cover letter in full. "Dear Ms. Chen, I know I'm the last person who deserves a chance from you or Athena Technologies. 3 years ago, I made the worst mistake of my life, professionally and personally. I betrayed not only our marriage but the company we built together, the vision we shared. There's no excuse for what I did. I could tell you I was flattered by Amber's attention, that I was going through a midlife crisis, that I thought Reynolds offered me something Athena couldn't. But the truth is simpler and uglier. I was selfish and short-sighted. I threw away 14 years with the most brilliant, determined woman I've ever known because I couldn't handle that you were becoming more successful than me. I won't ask for forgiveness. I haven't earned it. But I am asking for a chance to prove that I've changed, that I've learned from my mistakes. I'm willing to start anywhere, at any level, at any salary. I just want to be part of something meaningful again. The work you're doing with neural interfaces could change millions of lives. I want to contribute to that, even in a small way. I understand if this letter goes straight to your trash folder. But on the off chance you're reading this, thank you for taking the time. Respectfully, David Mercer. I closed the laptop, unsettled by the raw honesty in his words. The David I'd been married to would never have admitted to feeling threatened by my success. His ego wouldn't have allowed it. Maybe he had changed. Or maybe, as my mother would say, he was just desperate. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. The lack of sleep evident in the shadows beneath my eyes despite my careful makeup. Mariana took one look at me and silently brought an extra strong latte to my desk. The Davis meeting is in 30 minutes, she reminded me. And Dr. Kim wants 10 minutes to discuss the latest test results on the neural interface. I nodded, grateful for the demanding schedule that would keep my mind occupied. Has HR processed yesterday's applications yet? Already in the system, she confirmed, giving me a knowing look. Including his. Forward his file to me, I said before I could change my mind. And set up an interview for Friday at 7 a.m. Mariana's eyebrows shot up. 7 a.m.? That's cruel, even for you. If he wants this job badly enough, he'll be there. And if he is, what then? I took a sip of my latte, appreciating its bitter strength. Then I'll decide what to do with him, say. Davis meeting went smoothly, another major investor excited by our progress. Dr. Kim's test results were even more promising than expected, with the neural interface showing a 40% improvement in response time over our previous prototype. By lunchtime, I'd almost managed to push thoughts of David aside, until Mariana appeared in my doorway, her expression troubled. He's back, she said simply. David? She nodded. He brought lunch for the entire finance department. Said he wanted to get to know the team he hopes to join. They're all in the break room right now, eating Thai food and listening to him tell stories about the early days of Athena. A surge of indignation rose within me. He's campaigning, trying to win people over to pressure me into hiring him. It's working, Mariana admitted. Tyler from accounting just told me David helped them solve a reconciliation issue they've been struggling with for weeks. I stood, straightening my blazer. Where is he now? Still in the break room, holding court. The break room fell silent as I entered, all eyes turning to me. David stood by the window, Thai takeout containers spread across the table before him, surrounded by several members of my finance team. Mr. Mercer, I said coolly. I wasn't aware you'd been invited back to Athena today. He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed, though the confident smile never left his face. I thought I'd drop by with lunch, get to know some of the team. Hope that's okay. It's not, I replied evenly. Athena has a strict security policy regarding unauthorized visitors. Ms. Chen, Tyler from accounting stepped forward. David was just helping us with the Jensen account discrepancy. He spotted the error right away. How fortunate, I said, not taking my eyes off David. However, company financial information is confidential. Mr. Mercer is not an employee and should not have access to our accounts. David's smile faltered. Liz, Ms. Chen, I was just trying to be helpful. My office. Now. I turned and walked out, not waiting to see if he followed. He did, of course. David had always known when to push and when to retreat strategically. Once inside my office, I closed the door and faced him. What exactly do you think you're doing? Networking, he replied, his tone lighter than the situation warranted. Isn't that what all job seekers are told to do? You're manipulating my team, trying to create allies so I'll feel pressured to hire you. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I'm trying to show you what I can bring to Athena. Your finance team is good, but they're struggling with basic reconciliation issues that I solved in 10 minutes. And you think that entitles you to a position here? No. For the first time, his confident facade cracked. Nothing entitles me to anything from you, Liz. I know that. But I am qualified for this job. More than qualified. I helped build Athena's financial structure from the ground up. And then you left it for a competitor, I reminded him, taking your institutional knowledge with you. I never shared Athena's proprietary information with Reynolds, he said firmly. I may have been a terrible husband, but I wasn't disloyal to the company. I laughed bitterly. How convenient to separate the two now. When you left me, you said, and I quote, I need a fresh start, away from everything we built together. That included Athena. David's shoulders slumped. I was wrong. About everything. I see that now. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Through my office windows, I could see the Seattle skyline, clearer today, the rain having given way to watery sunshine. You have an interview scheduled for Friday at 7 a.m., I finally said. If you're serious about this job, you'll be there, prepared for a standard interview process. No more stunts like today. Relief washed over his face. Thank you, Liz. I'll be there. Don't thank me yet. I moved to open my office door. And it's Ms. Chen in this building. You lost the right to call me Liz when you walked out. He nodded, properly chastised. Of course, Ms. Chen. As he walked past me, I caught a whiff of his cologne, different from what he used to wear during our marriage. Another small change that somehow made this whole situation more real. This wasn't the David I'd married, nor was I the Eliza he'd left behind. We were strangers now, navigating unfamiliar territory. One more thing, I said as he reached the door. If you're hired, and that's a big if, you'll report directly to me. Every decision, every recommendation will cross my desk. You'll have a fraction of the autonomy you had before. Can your ego handle that? His blue eyes met mine, serious now. I guess we'll find out on Friday. After he left, I returned to my desk, disturbed by how easily he'd managed to charm my finance team in a single lunch hour. David had always been charismatic, capable of making people feel like they were the most important person in the room when he focused his attention on them. It was what had drawn me to him when we met in business school 17 years ago. His easy confidence, his infectious enthusiasm for the future we could build together. Back then, we'd been equals, partners in every sense. Our marriage had coincided with the founding of Athena, our personal and professional lives so intertwined that sometimes I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began, until he decided to sever both connections in a single, devastating blow, my ye. Phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Kim. Neural interface prototype ready for your review. Results exceeding expectations. I forced David from my thoughts, focusing instead on what truly mattered. The revolutionary technology we were developing. Technology that could help paralyzed patients regain mobility, allow amputees to control prosthetics with their thoughts, and possibly even help treat certain neurological disorders. This was my legacy, not the failed marriage that had nearly destroyed me 3 years ago. Not the man who now found himself on the other side of fortune's wheel, looking to me for salvation. The question was, could I separate my personal feelings from what might be best for Athena? And more importantly, did I want to? By Friday morning, I had my answer, one that had come to me in the quiet hours before dawn as I stood on my deck, watching the lake's surface ripple in the gentle breeze. The sun was just beginning to rise when I arrived at the office. the building still mostly empty except for the cleaning staff and a few early birds from the development team. And David, of course, sitting in the reception area nearly an hour before his scheduled interview, reviewing notes on a tablet, a portfolio beside him. He wore a conservative navy suit, not the flashy designs he'd favored at Reynolds, and had trimmed his hair. He looked professional, prepared, and humbled. Good. He'd need to be all three for what I had planned. "Mr. Mercer," I greeted him formally as I passed. "You're early." He stood quickly. "Ms. Chen." "Yes, I wanted to make sure I was fully prepared." "The cool. Interview will begin precisely at 7. Mariana will come get you." I continued to my office, feeling his eyes on me as I walked away, wondering what he saw when he looked at me now. The wife he'd betrayed? The CEO he now needed to impress? Or someone entirely new, forged in the fire of his abandonment? At exactly 7 a.m., Mariana showed David into the conference room where I waited with Tyler from accounting and our HR director, Raul. The interview proceeded formally at first. Standard questions about his experience, his time at Reynolds, his understanding of Athena's current financial structure. David answered each question confidently, but without arrogance, acknowledging where his knowledge had gaps due to his 3-year absence from the company. He presented a detailed analysis of our publicly available financial reports, identifying areas for improvement and opportunities for growth. It was, objectively, an impressive performance. "And now," I said after 45 minutes, "the most important question." I leaned forward, fixing him with an unwavering gaze. "Why should I hire the person who nearly destroyed this company 3 years ago?" The room fell silent. Raul shifted uncomfortably, while Tyler suddenly found his notepad fascinating. David met my eyes steadily. "You shouldn't," he said simply. "Not if it's just about what I deserve or what's fair. I don't deserve this chance, and it wouldn't be fair to give it to me." His honesty caught me off guard. "But," he continued, "if the question is whether hiring me would benefit Athena, then I believe the answer is yes. I understand this company's financial DNA because I helped write it. I've spent 3 years at our biggest competitor, learning their strategies and weaknesses. And most importantly, I've learned, the hard way, that success means nothing if you sacrifice your integrity to achieve it." He paused, his gaze never leaving mine. "I'm not asking you to forgive me, Eliza. I'm asking you to use me. Use my knowledge, my experience, my connections. Use my regret if it helps. Because I will work harder for this company than anyone else you could hire, precisely because I know what it costs to lose it." For a moment, I said nothing, processing his words. Then I stood, gathering my notes. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Mercer. HR will be in touch regarding our decision." As Raul showed him out, I remained in the conference room, staring at the Seattle skyline now bathed in morning light. Tyler lingered, clearly uncertain whether to speak. "He's good," he finally ventured. "Really good. The analysis he did of our quarterly report spotted inefficiencies that we've been missing." "I know," I said quietly. "Are you actually considering hiring him?" Tyler asked, disbelief evident in his tone. I turned to face him. "I already have, but not for the position he applied for." "I don't understand." "You will." I gathered my things and headed back to my office, where Mariana waited with a fresh cup of coffee and a knowing look. "Decision made?" she asked. I nodded, taking the coffee. "Send him an offer letter, senior financial analyst, reporting directly to the CFO. Entry-level salary plus standard benefits package. No stock options, no signing bonus, 6-month probationary. Period." Mariana's eyes widened. "That's 2 levels below what he's qualified for, and about a third of what he was making at Reynolds." "I know. He'll reject it. Maybe." I took a sip of coffee. Or maybe he meant what he said about being willing to start anywhere. "And if he accepts?" I smiled, feeling a strange sense of peace settle over me. Then Athena gets a highly overqualified financial analyst who will work twice as hard as anyone else to prove himself. And I get to watch David Mercer, the man who left me for his secretary because he couldn't handle my success, report to Catherine Zhang, the 29-year-old CFO who I promoted last year. Mariana laughed softly. That's either brilliantly strategic or deeply petty. Why not both? I replied, turning to the window. After all, he's the one who taught me that business and personal matters sometimes overlap. As I watched the city come alive below, I thought about the long road that had brought me here, from the devastated woman sobbing on her kitchen floor 3 years ago to the CEO making calculated decisions about the man who had broken her heart. The pain hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something I could use, something that made me sharper, more decisive. Whether David accepted the position or not, I had reclaimed my power in offering it to him. The rest was up to him. The offer letter went out Friday afternoon. I didn't expect to hear back until Monday at the earliest. David would need time to process the insult thinly disguised as an opportunity, to weigh his dwindling options against his pride. So when my personal cell phone rang at 9:17 p.m. Friday night, Edison raising his sleek head from his bed at the unfamiliar sound, I was surprised to see David's name on the screen. "This is Eliza," I answered, keeping my voice neutral despite the flutter of anticipation in my stomach. "Is this a joke?" David's voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the undercurrent of anger. "Senior financial analyst? Reporting to someone half my age? 60,000 a year?" I took a sip of my evening tea, grateful he couldn't see my smile. "It's a legitimate offer for a position we need to fill." "It's an insult, and you know it." His voice dropped lower. "I ran all of finance at Athena for 7 years, Liz. I've been a finance director for 3 more. I have an MBA from Stanford. And now you have an offer from Athena Technologies. Congratulations. At less than 1/3 of my market value." Set my teacup down, irritation replacing amusement. "Your market value, David. Is that what Reynolds is paying you now?" "Oh, wait, they're not paying you anything as of next week." The silence that followed told me the barb had landed. "Look," I continued, softening my tone slightly, "you asked for a chance. This is it. Take it or leave it." "This isn't a chance. It's punishment," he said bitterly. "You're just trying to humiliate me." "If that were my goal, I'd have had security throw you out instead of offering you a position." I stood, carrying my phone to the wall of windows overlooking the lake. "The role is entry-level because your trust is entry-level. You'll need to rebuild it from the ground up." Another silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of our shared history. "I need to think about it," he finally said. "The offer expires Monday at noon." After he hung up, I remained at the window, watching moonlight ripple across the dark water. Part of me, a larger part than I wanted to admit, hoped he would accept. Not out of kindness or forgiveness, but because having David work beneath me, beneath the leadership team I'd built after he left, would be its own form of charis. Monday morning arrived with a storm front that turned the sky an ominous slate gray. I had meetings scheduled back-to-back, first with our legal team about patent protections for the neural interface, then with our marketing department about the upcoming product launch. At 11:58 a.m., just as I was wrapping up with the marketing team, Mariana appeared in the doorway of the conference room. "Mr. Mercer is here to see you," she said, her expression giving nothing away. The marketing team exchanged glances as they gathered their materials. Everyone at Athena knew the story, the founder's husband who'd left her for his secretary and gone to work for the competition. Office gossip traveled at the speed of light. "Send him in," I said, remaining seated at the head of the conference table. David entered as the last marketing team member left, closing the door behind him. He wore a charcoal suit, more subdued than his usual style, with a blue tie that matched his expression was unreadable. "Have you made your decision?" I asked, not bothering with pleasantries. He approached the table, but didn't sit. Yes. When he didn't elaborate, I raised an eyebrow. And? I accept your offer, he said, the words clearly difficult for him. But I have a counter-proposal. This isn't a negotiation, David. Just hear me out. He placed a folder on the table. I'll take the position, the salary, the title, everything is offered. But I want performance metrics, specific, measurable goals. If I meet them, I want scheduled reviews for potential advancement. I opened the folder, scanning the document inside. He'd outlined quarterly performance targets for himself, each more ambitious than our standard expectations for the role. You're setting yourself up to fail, I observed. These targets are aggressive. I know what I'm capable of. For the first time since entering, a hint of the old David, confident, ambitious, showed through. If I hit these numbers, exceed these goals, I want recognition, not favoritism, just fair evaluation. I studied him for a moment, noting the determination in his stance. Why accept it all? Your networks in the financial world are extensive. You could find another position. He finally sat, meeting my gaze directly. Not as quickly as I need to, and not in Seattle. Reynolds made sure of that when they let me go. They've been quietly suggesting I was responsible for some accounting irregularities. Were you? No, he said firmly. But perception matters more than truth in our industry. You know that. I did know that. Just as I knew that David, for all his faults, had always maintained impeccable financial standards at Athena. It was one of the foundational strengths we'd built the company on. I'll agree to quarterly reviews, I said finally, closing the folder. But the metrics will be adjusted to align with company standards. You don't get special treatment, positive or negative. Relief flickered across his face. Thank you. Don't thank me. This is business, not personal. A sad smile touched his lips. It's always been both with us, Liz. Not anymore, I replied coolly, standing to signal the end of our meeting. Report to HR tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. for processing and orientation. You'll start with the finance team on Wednesday. As he turned to leave, I added, And David? Catherine Zhang is an exceptional CFO who earned her position through talent and hard work. Treat her with anything less than full professional respect, and your employment will end immediately. I understand. He paused at the door. For what it's worth, I really am grateful for this chance. After he left, I returned to my office, closing the door behind me. Mariana appeared moments later with lunch, a salad I'd forgotten I'd ordered. So he accepted? She asked, placing the food on my desk. Yes. He starts Wednesday. The office pool had it at 3-1 against, she remarked. At my raised eyebrow, she added, Not that I participated, of course. Of course. I unwrapped. My salad, finding my appetite, had disappeared. Schedule a meeting with Catherine for this afternoon. I want to brief her personally. Catherine Zhang had joined Athena fresh out of MIT 5 years ago, a financial prodigy with an uncanny ability to spot market opportunities. I'd promoted her to CFO 8 months ago, after our previous financial head left for a startup. At 29, she was one of the youngest C-suite executives in the tech industry, and certainly the youngest in Athena's history. She took the news of David's hiring with professional composure, though her sharp eyes reflected her curiosity. You're sure about this? She asked after I'd explained the situation. He's overqualified for the position but desperate enough to take it, I replied. Use his expertise but maintain clear boundaries. He's not to have access to sensitive financial information until his probationary period is complete. Catherine nodded thoughtfully. The team will be confused by his placement, especially those who worked with him before. Let them be confused. His performance will speak for itself, one way or another. She studied me with the perceptive gaze that had helped her rise so quickly through Athena's ranks. Is this a test? For him or a punishment? I considered her question more seriously than I had when David asked something similar. Both, perhaps. Or maybe it's just business. With due respect, Ms. Chen, Catherine said carefully, when it comes to ex-husbands, it's never just business. Her insight was uncomfortably accurate. Just keep me updated on his performance, I said, effectively ending the conversation. That night, I found myself unable to sleep, my mind churning over the decision I'd made. Was I being vindictive, using my position to exact revenge for personal hurts? Or was I simply being cautious with someone who had proven themselves untrustworthy? The line between personal and professional had become so blurred that I couldn't see it clearly anymore. Wednesday arrived with a mixture of anticipation and dread coiling in my stomach. I deliberately scheduled myself out of the office for the morning, taking meetings with potential investors downtown. I told myself it was to give David space to settle in without my looming presence, but truthfully, I wasn't ready to see him in our space, my space, wearing an Athena employee badge, integrated into the company we had once built together. When I returned just after lunch, Mariana was waiting with updates. Mr. Mercer completed orientation yesterday without incident, she reported as we walked to my office. This morning, he met with the finance team and Catherine. According to Tyler, he was the model of humility and professionalism. It's been half a day, I pointed out. Let's not nominate him for Employee of the Month just yet. Also, she continued, ignoring my sarcasm, he brought his own lunch and ate at his desk while reviewing quarterly projections. No Thai food for the department today. I smiled despite myself. Good. Anything else? Catherine scheduled a finance department meeting for 3 p.m. She asked if you'd like to join. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to observe David's first day from a safe distance through the buffer of reports and secondhand accounts. But I was the CEO, and appearing to avoid my own finance department would send the wrong message to the team. Tell her I'll be there, I said, making the decision before I could overthink it. The finance department occupied the northeast corner of our office, with glass-walled meeting rooms and an open floor plan designed to encourage collaboration. As I approached, I could see the team gathering in the largest conference room, Catherine at the head of the table with presentation materials ready. David sat in the back row, dressed in a conservative button-down and slacks, a far cry from the designer suits he'd favored at Reynolds. He was taking notes on a company-issued laptop, his expression focused but neutral. He didn't notice me until I entered the room. Our eyes met briefly before he returned his attention to his screen, but not before I caught the flash of something in his gaze. Determination? Resignation? I couldn't be sure. Catherine began the meeting with an overview of first quarter results, followed by projections for the second quarter. The team was engaged, asking appropriate questions about revenue streams and expense allocations. David remained quiet, absorbing the information, his fingers occasionally typing notes. Now, Catherine said, approaching the meeting's midpoint, I want to discuss the Miller account reconciliation issue. Tyler, can you update us? Tyler, a competent but sometimes overly cautious senior accountant, explained the discrepancy they'd been struggling with, the same one David had apparently helped with during his impromptu lunch visit the previous week. The issue appears to be with how we're recognizing revenue from the extended service contracts, Tyler explained. I've been working with the new system, but the reporting module isn't capturing the deferred revenue correctly. We need a solution. Before month-end close, Catherine stated, her gaze sweeping the room. Any suggestions? Several team members offered ideas, most involving complex workarounds or manual adjustments that would be time-consuming and error-prone. Throughout the discussion, David remained silent, though I could see from his expression that he had thoughts on the matter. Catherine noticed too. Mr. Mercer, she said, deliberately using his formal name. You have experience with our previous system. Any insights? All eyes turned to David. This was a test, carefully orchestrated by Catherine. I recognized her strategy immediately. She was giving him an opportunity to contribute meaningfully while also establishing her authority. David straightened slightly. The new system actually has a specialized module for exactly this type of contract, he said, his tone neutral and professional. It's not well documented in the manual, but if you access the advanced settings under revenue recognition, there's a template for multi-year service contracts with varied delivery schedules. He paused, clearly aware of the room's attention. With your permission, I could show Tyler how to configure it. It should resolve the issue without any manual intervention needed for future reporting. Catherine nodded, her expression revealing nothing. That would be helpful. Schedule time with Tyler this afternoon. The meeting continued, with David offering input only when directly asked. He was carefully threading the needle, demonstrating his knowledge and experience without overstepping or trying to dominate the discussion. It was a side of him I hadn't seen before, this measured restraint. As the meeting concluded and the team dispersed, I lingered, watching as David approached Tyler about scheduling time to work on the revenue recognition issue. Catherine made her way to my side. Well? I asked quietly. He knows his stuff, she admitted, and he's being careful not to step on toes. Day 1, I reminded her. The real test will be whether he maintains that approach when faced with challenges or disagreements. Catherine smiled slightly. Don't worry, I plan to provide plenty of those. I returned to my office, trying to focus on the neural interface launch preparations, but my thoughts kept drifting to David. Seeing him in that meeting, competent but subdued, contributing without commanding, had unsettled me in ways I hadn't anticipated. This wasn't the David I remembered, the man who had dominated every room he entered with charismatic confidence. Nor was it the desperate, humbled figure who had begged for a job in my office. This was someone new, or perhaps someone I had never allowed myself to see before. The week progressed with David settling into his role. Reports from Catherine indicated he was performing well, addressing the tasks assigned to him efficiently, and offering guidance to team members who sought his help, but never overstepping his position. By Friday, I had almost managed to adjust to his presence in the building, until Mariana informed me that he had requested a meeting. He says it's about the Jensen account, she added. Catherine approved the request. I sighed, glancing at my crowded calendar. Fine, 15 minutes at the end of the day. At 5:45 p.m., David knocked on my office door, a folder and tablet in hand. Most of the staff had already left for the weekend, the office quiet save for the distant hum of the cleaning crew beginning their rounds. Come in, I called, not looking up from my computer. I finished reading an email before finally acknowledging his presence. You wanted to discuss the Jensen account? David took the seat across from my desk, placing the folder between us. Yes, I've been reviewing their payment history as part of the reconciliation project Catherine assigned me. And? They've been consistently late with payments for the past 3 quarters, he said, opening the folder to reveal a neatly organized payment timeline. But always just under the wire before we'd implement late fees or penalties. I frowned, taking the document. That's not unusual for Jensen. They've always pushed payment terms to the limit. What is unusual is the pattern, David continued, pulling up a spreadsheet on his tablet. Their payments arrive exactly 29 days after the due date, 1 day before our system would automatically flag them for collection processes. Meaning, someone at Jensen has inside knowledge of our accounting processes, he said simply. They're gaming our system deliberately to maximize their cash flow at our expense. I studied the data, seeing the pattern clearly now that he'd pointed it out. This is good work, but why bring it directly to me? This is something Catherine should handle. David hesitated, then said, because it started 3 months after I left Athena. And Jensen was my account. The implication hung in the air between us. You think someone at Reynolds learned about our collection protocols from you and passed it to Jensen? I asked, my voice sharper than intended. Not intentionally, he said quickly. But yes, I suspect information I shared at Reynolds may have made its way to Jensen. I never explicitly discussed Athena's processes, but in casual conversation, details slip. I leaned back in my chair, studying him. Why tell me this? You're essentially admitting to being the source of a problem that's cost us thousands in delayed payments. Because it needs to be fixed, he said simply. And because I owe you transparency. All of you. I considered his words, searching for ulterior motives and finding none apparent. What do you recommend? Change the automatic flagging in the system to a randomized date between 25 and 30 days, he suggested. I've drafted the technical request for IT. With your approval, we could implement it next week. I reviewed the document he handed me, noting the thoroughness of his proposal. I'll discuss this with Catherine on Monday. Thank you. He stood to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. About Jensen. About everything. You've made that clear, I replied neutrally. Have I? He looked directly at me now, his blue eyes serious. Because sometimes I think all you see when you look at me is the man who hurt you 3 years ago. That's who you are. Part of who I was, he corrected gently. People change. Liz. Sometimes because they want to, sometimes because they have to. Sometimes both. I stood, unwilling to engage in this line of conversation. It's been a long week, David. Was there anything else about Jensen? He accepted the dismissal with a slight nod. No, that's all. Have a good weekend, Ms. Chen. After he left, I remained at my desk, staring at the Jensen data without really seeing it. David's work was excellent, thorough, insightful, and proactive. He'd identified a problem that had been costing Athena money for years, one that no one else had noticed, and he'd done it from a junior position with limited system access in less than a week. More unsettling was his willingness to implicate himself in the origin of the problem. He could have simply presented the pattern without connecting it to his departure, but he'd chosen transparency instead. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. Mercer's Jensen analysis is solid. Implemented his fix yet? I responded. Discussing. Monday. Thoughts on his first week? Her reply came quickly. Better than expected. Team respects his knowledge but says he's careful not to overshadow anyone. Humble but effective. I set my phone down, troubled by the positive report. Part of me had expected, perhaps even wanted, David to fail, to reveal the arrogance and selfishness that had characterized his betrayal. His competence and humility were harder to process, harder to reconcile with the narrative I'd constructed about who he was. The drive home took me past our old neighborhood, where David and I had bought our first house, a modest craftsman that we'd renovated together during Athena's early years. Without conscious decision, I found myself turning down the familiar street, slowing as I approached the blue house with white trim. New owners had painted the front door red, a change that somehow bothered me more than it should have. The maple tree we'd planted in the front yard had grown taller, its branches now reaching toward the second-story windows. Through those windows, I could see lights on, lives being lived in the space where mine had once shattered. I drove on, unsettled by the wave of emotions the house had triggered. Not longing for what was lost, exactly, but acknowledgement of how completely things had changed, both the house and myself. At home, I poured a glass of wine and took it out to the deck, overlooking the lake. Edison joined me, his quiet presence a comfort as I watched the sun setting over the water. My phone buzzed again, an email notification from David. The subject line read, Jensen Implementation Plan. Even on a Friday evening, he was working, preparing for Monday's discussion. I set the phone aside without opening the email, unwilling to allow David to intrude further into my weekend. But as darkness fell and the first stars appeared over the lake, I found myself thinking about what he'd said. People change. The question was whether I was willing to see that change, to acknowledge it as genuine rather than a calculated performance, designed to regain his former position and status. And deeper still, lurking beneath my professional assessment of his work at Athena was a more troubling question. If David had truly changed, if his regret was genuine and his humility real, what did that mean for the walls I'd built around my heart after he left? Some risks were too great to take twice. I'd survived David Mercer's betrayal once. I wasn't sure I could do it again. Yet as I returned inside, refilling my wine glass and settling on the sofa with Edison curled beside me, I found myself opening his email and reading through his implementation plan for the Jensen account. Thorough, professional, and unmistakably brilliant. Just like the man himself had once been. Just like he might still be. The realization sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the lake breeze finding its way through the open windows. I was standing at a crossroads, professionally and perhaps personally, regarding David Mercer, and I had absolutely no idea which path to take. Monday morning's executive meeting began with Catherine presenting David's findings on the Jensen account. The leadership team, composed of our CTO, COO, CMO, and heads of major divisions, listened attentively as she explained the pattern and proposed solution. The recommendation came from David Mercer, Catherine concluded, her tone professionally neutral. He identified the pattern during routine reconciliation work. Marcus Lee, our COO, and one of the few remaining executives from Athena's early days, raised an eyebrow. Mercer's been here less than a week and he's already uncovering revenue issues we've missed for years? The pattern began after his departure, I explained, keeping my voice even. He recognized it because he was familiar with our collection protocols from his previous time here. And he admitted that connection himself, Catherine added. He was transparent about potentially being the inadvertent source of the information leak. Marcus looked impressed despite himself. Interesting. Is the solution viable? It has reviewed it, Catherine confirmed. Implementation would be straightforward and could be completed by end of day. We estimate it could improve our cash flow by approximately $200,000 annually by eliminating these strategic payment delays. Proceed, I instructed, deliberately moving the discussion forward before it could linger too long on David's contribution. Next item, the neural interface clinical trials. After the meeting, Marcus lingered behind as the others filed out. He'd been with Athena almost from the beginning, joining 6 months after David and I founded the company. He'd known us as a couple, had watched our marriage disintegrate, and had helped me pick up the pieces of the company afterward. So, he said, once we were alone, the prodigal husband returns. I shot him a warning look. Employee. The prodigal employee. Marcus leaned against the conference table, arms crossed. Come on, Eliza. This is me you're talking to. What's your end game here? Athena gets a highly qualified financial analyst at entry-level cost. That's the end game. And it has nothing to do with making him work under the woman who replaced him? Or having him crawl his way back up from the bottom? I gathered my materials, unwilling to acknowledge the accuracy of his assessment. David's placement is based solely on rebuilding trust after he left for a competitor. Right. Marcus's skepticism was evident. And how's that going? The trust rebuilding? The question caught me off guard. How was it going? After 1 week, David had already proven his value to the finance team, identified a significant issue, costing us money, and by all accounts conducted himself with humility and professionalism. It's progressing, I finally said. Marcus studied me, his expression softening. Be careful, Liz. I watched what his betrayal did to you, to the company. Just make sure whatever you're doing here is healthy, for everyone involved. His concern was genuine, which made it harder to dismiss. I appreciate the advice, Marcus, but I'm fine. This is a business decision, nothing more. If you say so. He headed for the door, then paused. By the way, that business decision has been working through the weekend. I'd mentioned he came in Sunday to help with the Jensen implementation preparation. After Marcus left, I found myself thinking about what he'd said. David working weekends wasn't unusual. He'd always been dedicated to his job. But coming in on Sunday to assist with implementing a solution to a problem he'd identified showed initiative beyond what the position required. I decided to see for myself how the implementation was progressing. The finance department was buzzing with activity when I arrived, with David and 2 IT specialists huddled around a workstation, reviewing code on a screen. The randomization function needs parameters, one of the IT staff was saying. Otherwise, it might generate values outside our target range. David nodded. Set the minimum to 25 days and the maximum to 30. That gives us the variability we need without extending too far beyond our standard terms. They worked with focused efficiency, not noticing my presence until Catherine approached from her office. "Ms. Chen," she greeted me. "We're just finalizing the implementation. Initial testing looks promising." David looked up, momentary surprise crossing his features before he composed himself. "We should be ready to deploy by end of day," he reported. "It has been extremely helpful in expediting the process." "Excellent," I said. "Keep me updated on the results. I'd like to see comparison data after the next Jensen payment cycle." As I turned to leave, David spoke again. "Actually, Ms. Chen, there's something else you should know." I paused, turning back to him. "Yes?" "While working on this, we discovered similar patterns with 2 other accounts, Westridge Manufacturing and Prism Solutions. They're both former Reynolds clients who became Athena customers in the last 2 years." Catherine frowned. "You think there's a connection?" "It's possible," David admitted. "Both companies work with the same accounting firm that Jensen uses. If information about our collection processes spread through that channel..." He didn't need to finish the thought. The implications were clear and potentially significant for our cash flow. "Expand the implementation to include all accounts," I decided immediately, "and conduct a full audit of payment patterns across our client base. I want to know if this is isolated or systemic." "I'll oversee it personally," Catherine assured me. "I'd like to help," David offered. "I can draft the audit framework based on what we've found so far." Catherine glanced at me, silently asking if this expanded role was acceptable. I nodded slightly. "Coordinate." "With Tyler and the rest of the team," she instructed David. "I want preliminary findings by Thursday." As I walked back to my office, I found myself impressed despite my reservations. David wasn't just doing the job he'd been assigned, he was actively looking for ways to add value, to solve problems that extended beyond his immediate responsibilities. It was exactly what had made him an exceptional financial director years ago, before everything had fallen apart. Mariana was waiting with my afternoon schedule when I returned. Dr. Kim called. The final neural interface prototype exceeded all test parameters. He wants to move the timeline for clinical trials forward by 2 weeks. "Schedule a meeting with the research team for tomorrow," I replied, my mind shifting to the technology that had become Athena's future. "And see if we can get FDA preliminary feedback expedited. Also," she added, "the Thompson account wants to increase their order by 30%. Their CEO specifically mentioned being impressed with our renewed financial acumen." I paused. "Did they mention David?" "Not by name," Mariana replied. "But their CFO apparently spoke with Catherine last week about some accounting recommendations that came through her department." Another point in David's favor. The Thompson account had been one of our most challenging relationships since his departure, the connection having been primarily maintained through his personal relationship with their financial team. By Wednesday afternoon, the expanded audit was already yielding results. Catherine called an emergency meeting of the finance department, including me at the last minute when the findings proved more significant than anticipated. I arrived to find the conference room filled with finance staff, David standing beside Catherine at the front, a complex spreadsheet projected on the screen. We've identified a systematic pattern affecting approximately 22% of our accounts, Catherine was explaining as I slipped into the back of the room. The total impact on our cash flow is estimated at nearly $1.2 million annually. Murmurs spread through the room. That was a substantial sum for delayed payments, enough to fund several new research positions or accelerate our product development timeline. Mr. Mercer has developed a comprehensive solution, Catherine continued, nodding to David. He stepped forward, his manner confident but not domineering. The issue extends beyond simple payment delays. We've discovered that information about several of our internal processes has been compromised, not just collection protocols, but also contract renewal timing and fiscal year budgeting periods. He clicked to the next slide, showing a detailed implementation plan. We're proposing a complete overhaul of these systems, introducing variable parameters and enhanced security protocols. The changes would be invisible to our legitimate business operations, but would effectively neutralize the advantages some clients have been exploiting. The presentation continued, with David explaining each component of the solution with clarity and precision. The finance team was engaged, asking thoughtful questions that David and Catherine answered as a seamless unit. It was remarkable how quickly they'd developed an effective working relationship, despite the unusual circumstances. After the meeting, Catherine lingered to discuss next steps with me. The implementation will take about 3 weeks, she said, but the potential return makes it a top priority. David seems to have taken the lead on this, I observed. Catherine nodded. He has the experience and institutional knowledge we needed. I delegated significant responsibility to him for this project, with appropriate oversight. Was that acceptable? The question wasn't just professional courtesy. She was genuinely seeking my approval for expanding David's role beyond his nominal position. It's appropriate given the circumstances, I acknowledged, but make sure the official records reflect that this was a team effort, not just David's work. I don't want the rest of the department feeling overshadowed. Already addressed, she assured me. He's been excellent about sharing credit and involving others in the process. Tyler and Amara have been particularly engaged. After she left, I found myself reflecting on how quickly David had integrated into the finance team. In just over 2 weeks, he'd gone from a potentially disruptive addition to a valued contributor, all while maintaining the humility his position required. It was confusing. The narrative I'd constructed about David, selfish, arrogant, disloyal, was being challenged daily by his actions since returning to Athena. Thursday evening found me working late, reviewing the clinical trial protocols for the neural interface. The office was quiet, most employees having departed hours ago. I was deeply focused on the technical specifications when a knock at my opened door startled me. David stood in the doorway, briefcase in hand, clearly on his way out. Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to drop off the completed audit report for your review. He placed a bound document on the corner of my desk. The formal presentation is scheduled for Monday, but Catherine thought you might want to review the findings beforehand. Thank you, I said, momentarily disoriented by the interruption. You're here late. Final details on the implementation plan, he explained. I wanted to make sure everything was ready for tomorrow's IT handoff. I nodded, noticing the fatigue around his eyes, the slight slouch in his normally perfect posture. He'd been working intensely since arriving at Athena, pushing himself far beyond what the position required. The team seems impressed with your work, I said, surprising myself with the observation. A small smile crossed his face. They're a good group, talented, dedicated. Catherine has built an excellent department. Yes, she has. The silence stretched between us, not quite comfortable, but not entirely awkward either. I should let you get back to your work, he said finally, turning to leave. David, I called after him, the words forming before I could reconsider. The neural interface clinical trials are moving forward. We're having a small celebration tomorrow after the all-hands meeting. You should come. He looked genuinely surprised by the invitation. Are you sure? I wouldn't want to make anyone uncomfortable. You're part of Athena now, I said simply. The team should know that includes all company events. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. Thank you. I'll be there. After he left, I stared at the audit report he'd delivered, not seeing the pages. What was I doing? Inviting David to the celebration felt like a shift in our carefully maintained professional distance, a crack in the wall I'd built between my past and present. Yet it also felt right somehow. His work was directly contributing to Athena's success, which meant more resources for the Neural Interface project. He deserved to be included in celebrating the milestone. Friday's all-hands meeting filled our largest conference space with employees from every department. As CEO, I delivered the exciting news about the neural interface trials moving forward ahead of schedule, acknowledging the dedicated work of our research team and the support provided by every department. This technology will change lives, I concluded, and everyone in this room has contributed to making it possible. So today, we celebrate not just a product milestone, but the collaborative spirit that defines Athena. Applause filled the room as I stepped away from the podium, the formal meeting transitioning into a celebration complete with champagne and catered refreshments. The mood was festive, employees mingling across departmental lines, united by the shared achievement. I circulated through the crowd, accepting congratulations and redirecting praise to the teams that had done the actual work. Eventually, I found myself near the windows overlooking the city, momentarily alone with my thoughts. Impressive achievement. David's voice came from beside me as he approached, offering a glass of champagne. The neural interface was still in early development when I left. I accepted the glass. Dr. Kim and his team have been remarkable. The potential applications keep expanding as the technology evolves. I reviewed some of the projections in the investor materials, he said. If the clinical trials confirm even half of the preliminary results, Athena will be positioned to dominate the neurotech market for years. That's the plan, I replied, sipping the champagne. It's more than that, David said quietly. It's your vision, Liz. You've always seen possibilities others couldn't imagine. It's what made you exceptional as a founder. The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. We both contributed to Athena's foundation, I said, unable to fully accept his praise. We did, he acknowledged. But this... He gestured around us, at the thriving company filled with talented, engaged employees. This is yours. You built this after I left. After I tried to destroy it by leaving. The raw honesty in his words hung between us, more potent than the champagne. Why did you really come back, David? I asked, the question that had been lurking in my mind since he first appeared in my office. There must have been other options, other cities, other companies. He looked out at the Seattle skyline, considering his answer. Part of it was practical. I needed a job and my reputation was damaged. But that's not the whole truth. He turned back to me, his blue eyes serious. I came back because this is where I belong, not just at Athena, but in Seattle, near the life I threw away. I needed to face what I'd done, to see every day what I lost through my own selfishness. That sounds like punishment, not career planning, I observed. A sad smile touched his lips. Maybe it started that way, but these past few weeks, working with the team, contributing to something meaningful again, it's reminded me of why we built Athena in the first place. To create technology that matters, with people who care about more than just profits. His words resonated uncomfortably with my own feelings about the company. Despite everything, David still understood Athena's core mission, the vision that had brought us together as founders and partners all those years ago. Before I could respond, Catherine appeared beside us, her expression apologetic at the interruption. Ms. Chen, the investors from Meridian Capital have arrived. They're asking to speak with you about the clinical trials timeline. Of course, I said, grateful for the escape from a conversation that was veering into dangerous emotional territory. David, excuse me. He nodded, stepping back. Thank you for including me today. The rest of the afternoon was consumed with investor meetings, discussions with the research team, and the 100 other responsibilities that came with running a growing technology company. By the time I returned to my office, the celebration had wound down, employees drifting back to their departments or heading home to start their weekends. Mariana was waiting with final updates before she left for the day. The Meridian Capital representatives were impressed. They're considering increasing their investment for the next round. Good. We'll need the additional funding to accelerate the clinical trials. Also, she added, her tone carefully neutral, Catherine submitted her first-month evaluation of David Mercer's performance. I looked up from my desk. And? She's recommending an expanded role. Financial strategy analyst, reporting directly to her. Still significantly below his previous level, but with more responsibility and a modest salary increase. I wasn't surprised by the recommendation. David's contributions over the past weeks had more than justified the promotion. Yet something in me hesitated at the idea of him advancing so quickly. The review period isn't over yet, I pointed out. He's barely started his second month. Catherine feels his contributions to the payment audit alone justify accelerated advancement. The team apparently agrees. Tyler and Amara both submitted supporting statements. I took the folder containing the formal recommendation, scanning Catherine's detailed assessment. Her evaluation was professional and thorough, documenting specific contributions and their measurable impact on department performance. It was exactly the type of evidence-based review I expected from her. I'll consider it over the weekend, I said, setting the folder aside. Anything else before you go? Mariana hesitated, then said, just one personal observation. The changes to the payment systems that David implemented, they've already caught 2 attempts by clients to delay payments. The finance team says the system is working perfectly. After she left, I sat alone in my office, the city outside my windows transitioning from day to evening as the sun began its descent. The folder containing Catherine's recommendation seemed to demand my attention, a decision I wasn't quite ready to make. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Dinner at Sullivan's? Need to discuss Thompson expansion proposal. The idea of discussing business over a good meal appealed after the emotional complexity of the day. I texted back my agreement and gathered my things to leave. As I passed through the finance department on my way out, I noticed David still at his desk, focused intently. On his screen, most of the department had already left for the weekend, but he remained, apparently absorbed in his work. Without conscious decision, I found myself walking toward him. Still here? He looked up, startled from his concentration. Just finalizing. The transaction reports for the week. Catherine mentioned the system caught 2 attempted payment delays today. So I heard. Good work. He smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. Thank you. It's satisfying to see something I helped develop actually working as intended. I gestured to the screen. That can wait until Monday. It's been a long week. Just about finished, he assured me. Another 10 minutes or so. I nodded, turning to leave, then paused. Catherine submitted her recommendation for your position. Adjustment. His expression revealed both surprise and cautious hope. I didn't ask her to do that. I know. She made that clear in her report. I'm happy where I am, he said carefully. Whatever you decide, I'll continue doing my best work for the team. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't the calculating ambition of the man who had left for Reynolds, but something more measured, more genuine. Enjoy your weekend, David, I said, unable to offer more than that as I walked away. Outside, the early evening air carried the fresh scent of approaching rain, the Seattle sky darkening with clouds. As I walked to my car, I found myself looking back at the Athena building, at the light still illuminating a few windows. Dedicated employees like David, completing one last task before starting their weekends. 3 weeks ago, I'd offered him that position as a form of justice, perhaps even revenge, making the man who'd betrayed me work beneath the woman who'd replaced him, stripping him of the status and authority he'd once enjoyed. Now, watching him through the windows, still at his desk when everyone else had gone home, I wondered if I'd miscalculated. David's humility, his dedication, his willingness to start again from the bottom, these weren't the actions of someone merely seeking employment security. They were the actions of a man trying to redeem himself. The question that haunted me as I drove to meet Marcus wasn't whether David deserved the promotion Catherine had recommended. The evidence clearly supported it. The real question was whether I was ready to acknowledge that the man I'd been determined to punish might actually be worthy of a second chance. Professionally, and perhaps in ways I wasn't yet ready to examine, personally as well. Rain began to fall as I pulled into the restaurant parking lot, gentle at first, then stronger, washing over the city with its cleansing rhythm. I sat in my car for a moment, watching the droplets trace patterns on my windshield, each one following its own path, yet part of the same journey downward. Perhaps people were like that too, capable of following new paths while still being fundamentally themselves. The thought was both unsettling and oddly comforting as I finally stepped out into the rain, decisions still unmade but perspective somehow shifted. Dinner with Marcus proved a welcome distraction. We discussed the Thompson expansion proposal, debated strategy for an upcoming industry conference, and shared a bottle of excellent Pinot Noir. It wasn't until dessert that he broached the subject I'd been avoiding. So, Catherine submitted her recommendation for Mercer's promotion, he said, stirring his espresso. Quite the glowing review, I hear. News travels fast, I replied, not surprised that he already knew. It's a small company at the top. Are you going to approve it? I sighed, setting down my fork. Objectively, his work justifies it. The payment. Systems overhaul alone saved us more than his annual salary would cost. But it's been less than a month, Marcus. Promoting him so quickly sends a message to the rest of the team. He nodded thoughtfully. It does. It says, exceptional work gets recognized, regardless of history or circumstance. Or it says the rules are different for the CEO's ex-husband. Marcus leaned back, studying me. Is that what's really bothering you? Or is it that you're not ready to admit he might actually have changed? The question hit uncomfortably close to home. Both, perhaps, and more. Such as? I struggled to articulate feelings I'd barely acknowledged to myself. When he first came back, the dynamic was clear. He needed something from me, a job, security, redemption, whatever you want to call it. It gave me control, I suppose. And now? Now he's proving his value to Athena independently of me. The finance team respects him. Catherine wants to promote him. If this trajectory continues, you're afraid he won't need you anymore, Marcus finished, his insight typically precise. That he'll rebuild his career and move on, just like before. Was that it? The thought hadn't consciously formed until Marcus spoke it aloud, but it resonated with an uncomfortable truth. Part of me had wanted David to remain dependent, to need the opportunity I'd provided. His rapid success threatened that dynamic. It's more complicated than that, I said finally. Of course it is. Marcus signaled for the check. But whatever you decide about the promotion, make sure it's for the right reasons. Athena deserves your best judgment, not your lingering resentment or fear. His words stayed with me through the weekend as I divided my time between reviewing Catherine's recommendation, finalizing the neural interface clinical trial protocols, and taking long walks with Edison along the lakeshore. By Monday morning, I'd made my decision. I asked Mariana to schedule a meeting with Catherine and David for the afternoon. The morning passed in a blur of activity. Investor calls, department updates, and a promising conversation with the FDA about expedited review for our neural interface. By the time Catherine and David arrived for our meeting, I'd almost managed to convince myself that this was just another business decision. They entered together, Catherine confidently leading the way, David following with a carefully neutral expression. I gestured for them to sit in the chairs across from my desk. "Thank you for meeting with me," I began formally. "I've reviewed the recommendation for position adjustment and compensation review." Catherine nodded, her posture conveying professional assurance. "The finance team's performance has significantly improved since implementing the systems Mr. Mercer developed. The quantifiable impact justifies accelerated advancement." "I understand," I replied, turning my attention to David. "And what are your thoughts on this recommendation, Mr. Mercer?" He met my gaze directly, his composure remarkable given the circumstances. "I appreciate Catherine's confidence in my work. My focus has been on adding value wherever possible, not on advancement." "Yet advancement is precisely what's being proposed," I pointed out. "Financial strategy analyst is a significant step up from your current position with expanded responsibilities and authority." "Yes," he acknowledged. "If you approve the change, I'll work to justify that confidence. If not, I'll continue contributing in my current role." His equanimity irritated me, though I couldn't pinpoint why. Perhaps I'd expected more eagerness, more gratitude. The David I remembered would have advocated for himself, highlighted his accomplishments, pushed for what he deserved. This measured acceptance of whatever I decided felt almost like indifference, or worse, like pity. "The recommendation includes a 15% salary increase," I continued, watching for his reaction. "Still well below market for someone with your qualifications, but a substantial improvement." "The compensation is fair for the position," he replied, simply. I turned back to Catherine. "And you're confident he's ready for this expanded role? That the team will accept the accelerated promotion?" "I am," she said without hesitation. "Tyler and Amara have already been working with him in a quasi-leadership capacity on the system's implementation. This would formalize what's already happening organically within the department." I nodded, considering their responses. Everything they said aligned with the documentation, with the objective evaluation of David's contributions. There was no professional reason to deny the promotion, only my personal reluctance to see him advance so quickly. Marcus's words echoed in my mind. "Whatever you decide, make sure it's for the right reasons." "I'll approve the recommendation," I said finally. "Effective immediately. Catherine, please work with HR to update the organizational charts and compensation structure." "Thank you, Ms. Chen," Catherine replied, the formality of her response appropriate for the setting. "We'll implement the changes right away." "If that's all?" I said, indicating the meeting was concluded. Catherine stood to leave, but David remained seated, a slight frown creasing his brow. "Actually, there's one modification I'd like to request." I raised an eyebrow, surprised by his initiative. "Yes?" "The salary increase," he said. "I'd prefer to defer it until I've completed a full quarter in the new position. I want to demonstrate the value before accepting additional compensation." Catherine looked as surprised as I felt. "That's unusual, but technically possible," she said, glancing between us. "Any specific reason?" I asked, studying him. David met my gaze steadily. "I'm not here for the money, Liz. I'm here to rebuild what I damaged. My career, yes, but more importantly, my integrity. The position advancement gives me the opportunity to contribute more effectively. The compensation can wait until I've proven that contribution is sustainable." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, catching me off guard. This wasn't a calculated move or a bid for approval. It was a genuine expression of his priorities. "Very well," I agreed, more affected by his request than I wanted to admit. "Catherine, implement the position change with deferred compensation adjustment pending quarterly review." After they left, I remained at my desk, contemplating the unexpected turn our meeting had taken. David declining an immediate salary increase was far from the outcome I'd anticipated when I first offered him the entry-level position weeks ago. I'd expected him to grasp at any advancement, to revert to the ambitious, status-conscious man who had left me for a younger woman and a more prestigious title. Instead, he continued to demonstrate a humility and commitment to redemption that challenged my preconceptions. The rest of the day passed quickly, filled with the usual demands of running a growing tech company. It wasn't until evening, as the office quieted and most employees headed home, that I found myself thinking again about David's surprising request. A soft knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. David stood there, a folder in hand. "Sorry to disturb you," he said. "Catherine asked me to deliver the final audit report with the implementation results." "Thank you," I replied, accepting the folder. "Congratulations on your new position. Thank you for approving it." He hesitated, then added, "I know it couldn't have been an easy decision." "It was the right decision for Athena," I said, the professional answer coming automatically. A small smile touched his lips. "But not necessarily the easy one." I didn't contradict him. We both knew the complexity beneath the surface of this workplace. Interaction. "Why did you really turn down the immediate raise, David?" I asked, the question emerging before I could reconsider. He leaned against the doorframe, weighing his response. "Because I need you to understand something. This isn't about money or status or reclaiming what I lost. It's about proving, to you, to myself, to everyone, that I'm not the man who walked away 3 years ago." "And who is that man?" I asked, quietly. "The one standing here now?" "Someone who understands what matters," he replied, his voice equally soft. "Someone who learned the hard way that success means nothing if you destroy what's truly valuable in pursuing it." We looked at each other across the space of my office, a space that suddenly seemed both vast and intimate. For a moment, I saw him clearly, not as the husband who had betrayed me or the employee seeking advancement, but as a person who had made devastating mistakes and was genuinely trying to atone for them. "The neural interface clinical trials start next week," I said, making a sudden decision. "I'm hosting a small dinner at my home for the core research team on Friday. You should come." Surprise flickered across his face. "Are you sure? That seems more personal than a company celebration." "Your financial restructuring directly contributed to accelerating the timeline," I replied, offering the professional justification first. Then, more honestly, "And yes, I'm sure." He nodded, understanding the significance of the invitation. "Thank you. I'd be honored." After he left, I stood at my window, watching the lights of Seattle glimmer as darkness fell. The David who had walked out of my office wasn't the same man who had walked out of our marriage 3 years ago, nor was I the same woman he had left behind. We had both been transformed by the pain of that separation, by the choices we'd made in its aftermath. The question now was whether those transformations had brought us to a place where new understanding was possible. Not forgiveness, perhaps, at least not yet, but acknowledgement of change and growth. Friday evening arrived clear and cool, the lake reflecting the sunset in shades of gold and crimson as I prepared for the dinner party. Dr. Kim and 5 members of his research team would be joining us, along with Catherine, Marcus, and now David. Edison supervised from his favorite spot on the sofa as I arranged flowers and checked the catering preparations. The house, my sanctuary after David left, felt different tonight, charged with a nervous energy I hadn't experienced in years. At precisely 7, the first guests arrived. Dr. Kim and his team were animated with excitement about the upcoming trials, bringing prototype demonstrations and technical discussions that quickly established the evening's enthusiastic tone. Catherine and Marcus arrived together, having shared a ride from the office. Their easy camaraderie reflected the strong working relationship they'd developed over the years. David was last, arriving precisely on time with a bottle of wine, a Barolo from the small Italian vineyard we'd visited on our 5th anniversary. The thoughtful choice wasn't lost on me, though I maintained my composure as I welcomed him. Dinner progressed smoothly, the conversation flowing between technical discussions of the neural interface, lighter office anecdotes, and occasional reminiscences about Athena's early days. David participated naturally, offering insights without dominating, his presence gradually accepted by the group. Later, as the evening wound down and guests began to depart, David helped gather glasses from the deck where we'd had dessert and coffee. We found ourselves momentarily alone, the sounds of conversation drifting from inside where Marcus was entertaining the others with stories from our startup days. "Thank you for including me tonight," David said, setting the tray of empty glasses on the outdoor table. "It means more than you know," I nodded, looking out over the darkened lake. "It's been a strange few weeks, hasn't it?" "Strange," he agreed with a soft laugh. "But also clarifying, somehow." "How so?" "When I first came back, asking for a job, I thought I knew what I wanted," he said carefully. "Security, income, professional redemption. And now?" He turned to face me, his expression open and vulnerable in a way I'd rarely seen, even during our marriage. "Now I understand that what I really wanted was the chance to prove, not just to you, but to myself, that I could be someone worthy of respect again, someone who builds rather than destroys." The simple honesty of his words touched something deep inside me, a place I'd carefully walled off after he left. "You're doing that," I acknowledged quietly. "Building, I mean. The finance team, the systems implementation, your work with Catherine, it's making Athena stronger." "Thank you for giving me that chance," he said. "I know it couldn't have been easy to see me every day, to work with me again after what happened." "It wasn't," I admitted. "Still isn't sometimes." He nodded, accepting the truth of my words without defensiveness. "For what it's worth, I think you've built something remarkable here. Not just the company, but this life." He gestured to the beautiful home, the peaceful lake beyond. "You've thrived, Liz. Part of me is sad I missed seeing it happen, but mostly I'm just proud of you." His words hung in the cool evening air between us, sincere and unexpected. Before I could respond, Marcus appeared at the door, announcing that the research team was leaving. We returned inside, the moment passing unfinished as I bid farewell to my guests. David was the last to leave, pausing at the door. "Thank you for tonight," he said simply. "You're welcome," I replied, then added impulsively, "Same time next Friday? Just dinner, not a company event." The invitation surprised us both, a spontaneous step toward something neither of us had planned. "I'd like that," he said after a moment, his smile cautious but genuine. As I closed the door behind him, I realized we were entering uncharted territory. Not reconciliation. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. The past couldn't be erased, and the pain he'd caused couldn't be undone. But standing in my home, with the echo of the evening's warmth still lingering, I acknowledged a truth I'd been resisting. For weeks, people could change. I had changed. David had changed. Whether those changes could lead to a new beginning remained to be seen. But for the first time since he'd reappeared in my office, humbled and hopeful, I was willing to find out. Edison padded over, leaning against my legs in silent support as I gazed out at the moonlight sparkling on the lake. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new opportunities to lead the company we'd once built together. Tonight, I would simply rest in the knowledge that sometimes the most unexpected returns could lead to the most meaningful discoveries about business, about others, and most importantly, about ourselves. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.